It was a bright Saturday morning, and the small square in the center of the town was alive with movement. Families walked around with children holding ice cream, street vendors called out to sell their colorful wares, and a few buskers tried to capture the attention of passers-by. At one corner of the square, there was a piano. It wasn't an elegant concert piano that belonged in a grand hall. It was old, scratched, and looked like it had been left in the sun for years. People didn't even notice it most of the time, except to laugh and joke about how someone might try to play something on it. The keys were uneven, and a few of them made a hollow, funny sound. It seemed more like a toy than an instrument that could create real music. She had come to the square that morning without any plans. She wasn't a busker, as she wasn't there to perform. She had come to enjoy the weather and maybe buy a small pastry from one of the stalls. Her life was ordinary to the outside world. She worked quietly, went about her day, and had a small circle of friends who knew little about her private world. But there was something hidden within her, something she rarely let anyone see. She loved music. She had loved it for as long as she could remember. She had spent hours in her room teaching herself songs, playing melodies she heard in her head, practicing quietly so no one else would hear. Music was her escape, her companion, and her joy. But she had never played in front of a crowd. Not even once. That morning, as she walked past the old piano, a small group of people had gathered near it. They were laughing, joking, and teasing each other. One of them pointed toward the piano and said in a loud, joking voice, "Hey, anyone brave enough to play this thing?" Their laughter drew more attention, and she could hear other voices joining in the joke. People were daring each other to sit down, expecting something awkward or ridiculous. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized they were looking at her. Someone nudged their friend and said, "You should try it." Another voice shouted, "Come on, let's see you make a fool of yourself." The words were meant as a joke, a playful dare, but to her they felt like a small spark. For a moment she hesitated. Her fingers itched to play, to bring something real out of that battered piano, but doubt quickly crept in. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? The thought of all those eyes on her made her stomach tighten. She looked at the piano again. The sunlight reflected off the chipped wood, and the keys seemed almost to call her name. She took a deep breath, remembering all the hours she had spent practicing alone. She remembered the songs she had learned by heart, the melodies that had flowed from her fingers like a secret language. Nobody had ever heard her play. Nobody had seen the joy and the intensity she could put into music. And suddenly, the idea of keeping it hidden anymore didn't feel right. With a quiet determination, she stepped forward. The crowd noticed her and laughed at first, thinking this would be just another failed attempt at comedy. Some of them even whispered, "She doesn't look like she can play anything." Others rolled their eyes, waiting for a moment they could tease. But she didn't hear the laughter anymore. Her mind was focused, her heart beating fast but steady, and her fingers hovered above the keys. Sitting down, she placed her hands carefully. At first, she just touched a few keys, letting the sound surprise her, testing the piano's temperament. It didn't sound perfect. A few notes were flat, a few others were off. But there was a strange charm in the way it spoke. She could feel the music waiting for her to bring it to life. The crowd was still, a few people starting to look curious rather than mocking. The air seemed to thrum with expectation. Though no one knew it yet, she closed her eyes for a brief second, not to hide herself but to focus. She remembered all the songs she had practiced alone, all the little pieces she had composed in her notebook, all the melodies she had imagined when nobody was around. Music wasn't just sound to her. It was emotion, memory, and life all combined. And suddenly she realized she didn't care about anyone's judgment. For the first time, she would play for herself, and if others enjoyed it too, that would be a bonus. Her fingers began to move. The first few notes were careful, almost tentative. She listened closely to the sounds the piano made, adjusting to its quirks, finding a rhythm in its uneven keys. The music was soft at first, gentle, almost shy. But there was a hidden strength in it, a subtle beauty that drew a few people closer. They stopped joking, stopped whispering, and just watched. Something about the way she played made them pause. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and there was power in that honesty. As she continued, she felt a surge of confidence. Her hands remembered the practice she had done in secret. Her fingers danced across the keys, weaving notes together in a melody that felt alive. The crowd began to sense the change. Laughter had disappeared entirely. People were standing still, drawn to the unexpected beauty coming from the old, battered piano. Some had never imagined that such a sound could come from such an instrument. Others were surprised that someone so ordinary, who looked so unassuming, could produce something so captivating. Her heart raced, but in a different way now. It wasn't fear, it was joy. The kind of joy that comes from doing something you were born to do, even if the world didn't know it yet. For the first time in public, she felt completely herself, completely free. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her, but instead of pressure, it gave her energy. Each note she played became stronger, more confident, more expressive. She began to smile, a small, quiet smile, because she knew she was sharing a part of herself that nobody had ever seen, and the crowd, slowly at first and then all at once, started to react. People who had been ready to laugh were now stopping, mouths slightly open, eyes wide. They weren't just listening. They were feeling the music. Some whispered to each other, "Did you hear that?" Others shook their heads in disbelief. Nobody moved. Nobody joked. The square, once filled with casual chatter and laughter, had grown quiet. As if the music itself had taken control, for her, time seemed to slow. She played on, each note carrying a little bit of her story. The hours she had spent alone. The quiet evenings with just the sound of her piano and her imagination, all of it was here in this moment. She was no longer invisible, no longer just someone who could be laughed at. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a person who could touch the hearts of strangers with her gift. The first part of her performance was about finding courage, about stepping into the unknown. And though the crowd didn't yet fully realize what was coming, something in their minds had already shifted. They had gone from expecting a joke to witnessing something genuine. The air in the square had changed. People felt it. They could sense that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. She played on, the notes flowing freely now, guided by instinct and memory. And even as the first piece ended, the atmosphere remained heavy with anticipation. No one applauded yet. They didn't need to. They were caught in the moment, waiting, watching, realizing that what they had expected to be a laughable scene was quickly becoming a moment they would remember forever. For her, it was more than just the music. It was a small victory over fear, over doubt, and over the idea that ordinary people couldn't surprise the world. Sitting at that old joke piano, she had taken the first step toward showing herself and everyone else that talent and passion could come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most ordinary-looking person could create something extraordinary. And though she didn't know it yet, as the last notes of her first melody faded into the air, a strange silence fell over the square. The laughter that had filled the space just moments ago was gone, replaced by an almost sacred quiet. People stopped in their tracks, their eyes fixed on her hands as they hovered above the worn keys. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was as if the music had created a bubble around her, separating her from the ordinary noise of the world. Her heart was still racing, but now it was different from the fear she had felt before. It was a mix of exhilaration and nervous excitement. She realized that she had not only survived the dare, she had captured the attention of strangers. And yet, with all eyes on her, a small doubt crept in. What if I can't keep this up? She thought. What if I falter now and they realize I'm not as good as they think? The thought made her pause for a brief second, just long enough for her to feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her, but then she remembered why she had started playing music in the first place. She remembered the nights spent in her small room, alone with a notebook of melodies and a piano that wasn't much better than this one. She remembered the joy she felt when her fingers found the right combination of keys and the song in her head finally came alive. Music had always been her escape, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment. And now, even though dozens of people were watching, she realized she could reclaim that same freedom. Taking a deep breath, she let her fingers find their rhythm again. The piano was old and unpredictable, but she adapted, listening carefully to each note and adjusting her touch. The crowd leaned in slightly, drawn by the confidence she now displayed. Her first notes had been careful, almost timid, but now they were deliberate and expressive. Each sound carried emotion, soft, tender, and yet full of strength. As she played, she began to remember more than just the technical aspects of her music. She remembered the stories she had built around her songs, the memories that had inspired them. There was one melody she had written after a long, lonely evening when she felt invisible to the world. Another piece had come to her in a moment of pure joy, when the sun shone through her window and everything seemed possible. And now, each note she played in the square carried a fragment of her life. The crowd didn't know it, but they were listening to her story, told in the language of music. Some people began to shift closer, curiosity replacing the initial amusement. A few faces in the crowd showed disbelief, as if they couldn't reconcile the idea that this ordinary-looking person could create something so extraordinary. Others were silent, heads tilted, letting the music wash over them without a word. She could feel their attention, but instead of making her anxious, it inspired her. Each person in the crowd was a silent witness to her courage, and she didn't want to let them or herself down. Her fingers moved faster now, weaving notes together in a delicate, intricate pattern. She had learned early on that music wasn't just about hitting the right keys. It was about telling a story, expressing what words could never convey. And with every note she played, she told a piece of her heart. Some notes were light and playful, others heavy and soulful. The old piano, once thought to be a joke, responded in surprising ways, producing sounds that seemed to carry a life of their own. As the melody continued, she felt herself drifting into a space where time no longer mattered. She was aware of the crowd, aware of the sunlight on her hands and the uneven surface of the keys, but mostly she was aware of the music. It was a living, breathing thing, and she was guiding it with every movement of her fingers. The nervousness she had felt before had vanished, replaced by a calm focus that allowed her to play with confidence and passion. Around her, the crowd began to react in subtle ways. People who had been leaning against walls or walking past stopped to watch. Some held their breath at particularly beautiful chords. Others exchanged quiet whispers, trying to understand how someone could produce such sound from an instrument that seemed so inadequate. Even those who had been joking just moments ago now watched in silence. Captivated by the unexpected performance, she noticed an elderly man near the edge of the crowd, his eyes moist as he listened. She realized that music had the power to touch people in ways nothing else could. It could stir emotions, revive memories, and create connections between strangers. She felt a quiet thrill knowing that her private passion, her secret world, was now becoming something real for others. The old piano required more than just skill, it required creativity and patience. Sometimes a key didn't respond as expected, producing a hollow or flat sound, but she learned to work with it, letting her fingers dance around its imperfections. The piano had personality, and she treated it as a partner in her performance, not just an object. Each note, each pause, each delicate movement contributed to a story that was unfolding in real time. As she played, she also became aware of the energy of the crowd. Their initial skepticism had turned into curiosity, then into quiet admiration. People began to record small clips on their phones, not to mock her, but to capture the unexpected beauty they were witnessing. A few younger children watched wide-eyed, tugging at their parents' hands and pointing excitedly. She didn't play for the cameras, she didn't play for attention, she played because the music demanded it. But she couldn't help noticing the ripple effect of her courage and talent. Spreading through the square, her mind drifted back to the first time she had touched a piano. She had been a child, curious and shy, sitting in front of a big instrument in a dimly lit music room. The teacher had told her she wasn't ready, that her hands were too small and uncoordinated. But she had persisted, practicing quietly at home, learning from books, recordings, and her own determination. That persistence, those countless hours of private struggle, had brought her to this moment. And now, she could see that the hard work and patience had been worth it. With every note, her confidence grew. She began to add subtle variations, little embellishments that made the music her own. It was no longer a simple melody. It had depth, emotion, and nuance. She could feel the reactions of the crowd without needing to look up. The way people leaned forward, the soft gasps at particularly moving passages, even the quiet tears of some listeners, all of it told her that she was succeeding in a way she had never dared to imagine. And then came a moment when she faltered slightly, a wrong note. Just one, almost lost in the complexity of the piece. For a brief second, panic threatened to creep in. But instead of stopping, she allowed the note to be part of the music. She adjusted her hands, recovered seamlessly, and continued. That small imperfection reminded her that music, like life, wasn't about perfection. It was about expression, honesty, and courage. The crowd didn't notice the mistake. They only felt the beauty of her performance. As the melody reached a quiet, tender section, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about how far she had come from a shy person who hid her talent to someone brave enough to play in front of strangers. She realized that this moment wasn't just about impressing anyone. It was about proving to herself that she could step out of the shadows and share her passion with the world. And the fact that people were listening, watching, and responding only added to the magic of the experience. The music began to swell again, stronger and more confident than before. She let her emotions guide her fingers, allowing the piano to sing with every chord. The crowd was completely silent now, except for the occasional soft murmur of awe. The transformation in their reactions was incredible. People who had come to the square expecting entertainment or a joke were now witnessing a performance that touched their hearts. She could feel a strange sense of connection with the strangers around her. It was as if the music had created an invisible thread linking them together. Each note was a message, a piece of her soul being shared openly for the first time. And in that moment she realized that music wasn't just a private joy, it could be a bridge between people. A way to reach hearts without words. The first part of her journey in the square had been about courage, about stepping into the unknown and taking a risk. The crowd had watched her carefully, unsure of what to expect. And now, as the music flowed freely, she was showing them that hidden talent could exist anywhere in anyone, waiting for the right moment to shine. Even though the performance was far from over, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced the fear, embraced the challenge, and begun to reveal a side of herself that the world had never seen. The energy in the square was different now, charged with excitement, anticipation, and a newfound respect for the person at the piano. And though she didn't know it yet, this small step, the decision to play despite fear and doubt, was setting the stage for something extraordinary, something that would surprise everyone. As the soft echoes of her earlier notes faded into the morning air, she felt a change within herself. Something had shifted. What had started as a cautious, hesitant performance had now become alive and confident. She had overcome her initial fear, and the crowd, once ready to mock, had grown quiet, absorbed by the music she was creating. The energy in the square was different now. People weren't just listening. They were watching a story unfold, even if they didn't yet realize it. Her fingers began to move faster across the piano keys, no longer tentative but deliberate and fluid. The old piano, with its uneven keys and hidden imperfections, responded to her touch in surprising ways. Each note carried emotion, almost as if the instrument itself had come to life. She smiled slightly to herself. She had always loved challenges, and this piano, though meant as a joke, was pushing her to be better, to find creativity in unexpected places. The crowd had started to shift subtly. People who had been standing at the edges of the square were inching closer, drawn by the increasing intensity of the music. Children stopped in mid-step, their eyes wide, fascinated by the sound. Even those who had been laughing or whispering to friends earlier were now frozen, their attention completely focused on her performance. There was a sense of suspense, a quiet tension that filled the air, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music guide her. This was no longer about proving herself to the crowd or responding to their expectations. This was about her expression, her connection to the piano, and the story she wanted to tell through sound. Her hands moved with precision and grace, weaving notes together in a complex but beautiful melody. Every chord carried intention, and every pause held meaning. She wasn't just playing a song. She was sharing a part of her soul. Suddenly, a delicate variation slipped in, one that she had improvised on the spot. It was soft at first, almost whispering, a contrast to the stronger, louder parts she had played before. The crowd noticed the subtle shift. Some tilted their heads, trying to catch every nuance, while others instinctively leaned closer. Even the elderly man she had noticed earlier seemed to hold his breath, as if each note spoke directly to him. She could feel the power of the music reaching the people around her, connecting her to strangers in a way that words never could. Her mind briefly drifted back to all the times she had practiced alone, in quiet rooms with only the sound of her imagination as her guide. Each improvisation, each variation, each melody she had composed in private now had a chance to come alive in the public space. She realized that all her effort, all the hours of dedication that nobody had seen, were finally finding a stage. And the best part was that the audience didn't just hear the notes. They felt the emotion behind them. The music began to build again, stronger and more powerful than before. She played with increasing confidence, her fingers moving almost instinctively. Each chord seemed to command attention, demanding that the listeners stop whatever they were doing and focus. The laughter and casual chatter that had once dominated the square were gone completely. All that remained was the music and the people who had been drawn into it. She noticed that some members of the crowd were visibly moved. A young woman clutched her hands to her chest, her eyes glistening with tears. A man who had been leaning against a wall straightened, captivated by the melody. Even the children, who usually had the shortest attention span, were completely still, their faces fixed on the piano and the person creating the music. It was in these moments that she realized the true power of music. It could move people, change the atmosphere, and make strangers feel connected to one another. With every note, her confidence grew. She no longer worried about the piano's imperfections or what others might think. Instead, she focused on the story she wanted to tell. The melody shifted seamlessly between gentle, tender passages and bold, dramatic chords. The contrast kept the audience engaged, hanging on to each note, waiting to see what she would do next. Some people even held their breath at particularly powerful sections, as if afraid to break the spell. For her, the performance had become almost meditative. Time seemed to slow down, and all that mattered was the music and the connection it was creating. She could feel the pulse of the crowd, even without looking, and it fueled her to play with more passion and precision. The old piano, once considered a joke, now became an extension of her emotions. Each key she pressed, each chord she struck, became part of a dialogue between her and the audience. A conversation that transcended words. She paused for a brief moment to catch her breath, letting the silence hang in the air. The pause was intentional, allowing the notes she had just played to resonate and giving the audience a moment to absorb the beauty of the music. During that short silence, she could feel the collective energy of the crowd, their attention fully on her. It was a powerful sensation, one that she had never experienced before. She realized that she was no longer playing for herself alone, she was playing for them. For the strangers who had gathered, for the people whose hearts and minds were being touched by her performance. Then, with a deep breath, she began again, this time introducing a new melody that was both lively and intricate. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving faster now, yet with complete control. The music took on a life of its own, carrying a sense of excitement and anticipation. The crowd responded instinctively, leaning closer, their eyes wide with wonder. The energy of the square had transformed completely. From casual amusement to captivated admiration, she could see that the crowd had begun to sense her mastery of the piano. Even though she was not performing in a formal concert hall, they could feel the effort, the skill, and the emotion behind every note. People whispered to each other, not to mock, but in awe. How can someone play like this? It's unbelievable." The words carried through the square, but she didn't hear them. She was too absorbed in the music to notice. Every now and then, she glanced briefly at the crowd, noticing their reactions. Some faces were filled with astonishment, others with joy, and some even with tears. She realized that her music had created a shared experience, a moment where strangers were united by the beauty of what she was playing. She felt a surge of pride, but also humility, knowing that she had been given the opportunity to create this connection through her talent. Her improvisation reached a peak, the melody soaring with emotion and intensity. She played faster, more passionately, letting the music flow freely without overthinking. The piano responded to her touch, producing sounds that were unexpectedly rich and resonant despite its worn keys. The crowd was completely captivated now, and even those who had doubted her initially were forced to admit that they had underestimated her as she played. She began to notice small details in the audience's behavior. Some people had stopped recording on their phones, realizing that no device could truly capture the emotion of the moment. Others held hands or exchanged glances, silently sharing the experience. Children were whispering to each other, pointing at her hands and the piano, trying to understand the magic unfolding before them. Every reaction reminded her that music had the power to create connections and emotions that words could never fully express, even though she had never performed publicly before. She felt a sense of ease she had never known. The music was her guide, and the crowd had become part of the performance. Each note was a conversation, each chord a story. And in that conversation, there was no judgment. No expectation, only the shared experience of beauty and emotion. Her performance continued, each section more intricate than the last. She explored the piano's range, from the deepest, most resonant bass notes to the lightest, most delicate treble tones. The crowd was spellbound. Some closed their eyes to fully absorb the music, while others simply watched in awe, mesmerized by the skill and passion she displayed. The square had become a space of magic, a temporary sanctuary where the world's noise and distractions disappeared, replaced entirely by the sound of music and the emotions it carried. By now, the initial dare, the joke that had started this entire encounter, was completely forgotten. The piano was no longer a source of amusement. It had become a vessel for something profound. And she, once a quiet observer of life, had become the center of an unforgettable moment. She could feel the energy of the crowd feeding back into her performance, pushing her to play even better. It was a cycle of inspiration and emotion, and she was completely immersed in it. As part 3 of her story drew to a close, it was clear that this was no ordinary moment. What had begun as a simple dare on a worn-out piano had transformed into a breathtaking performance that captured the hearts and minds of everyone present. She had moved past fear, hesitation, and doubt, and in doing so, had revealed a side of herself that nobody had ever seen. The crowd, once ready to mock, as the music poured from the piano, the energy in the square shifted completely. What had begun as a quiet curiosity from the crowd was now full of amazement, wonder, and deep appreciation. People who had been joking earlier were no longer laughing. Their expressions had changed to something else entirely: astonishment, respect, even a touch of disbelief. They were witnessing someone take what seemed like a joke and turn it into a moment of beauty and emotion that filled the entire square. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, and the melody took on new dimensions. She added subtle flourishes and variations she had never tried before, improvising freely and letting her emotions guide her. The piano responded in ways that surprised her as well. The once worn, uneven keys now seemed alive, resonating with the depth of her passion. She could feel the music moving through her, connecting her to the people around her in a way she had never imagined possible. People started to gather closer, forming a semicircle around her. Their curiosity had transformed into complete attention. Strangers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unexpected talent before them. Some were recording short clips on their phones, but many simply put their devices away, realizing that no recording could truly capture the beauty of what they were hearing. It was something that had to be experienced in the moment. With every sense fully engaged, a few children had edged forward, their small hands gripping their parents' arms as they stared wide-eyed at the piano. They whispered to each other, pointing at her hands and the notes she played, trying to understand how such a sound could come from an instrument that had seemed so ordinary. Their innocence and awe only added to the atmosphere, and she smiled slightly, noticing the wonder in their eyes. For the first time, she realized that music could touch anyone. Regardless of age or background, her mind was fully immersed in the music. But she was also aware of the crowd in a way that added energy rather than pressure. She could sense their reactions, the subtle shifts in posture, the quick intakes of breath at particularly moving passages, the slight nods of heads in rhythm with her playing. It was a silent dialogue, a connection that transcended words. Each note she played was part of a conversation between herself and the people watching, and it felt alive, immediate, and real. Then she shifted into a slower, more delicate melody. The music softened, becoming tender and emotional, filled with subtle nuances that demanded close attention. She could see a few people blink back tears, their expressions revealing the depth of feeling her performance had awakened. One man, standing slightly apart from the rest, had tears streaming down his face. She didn't know him, and he didn't know her. Yet the music had created a bridge between them, a shared moment of human connection that neither of them would forget. The square itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the birds had quieted, as if sensing the magic of the performance. The sunlight fell gently on the piano and her hands, highlighting the concentration and passion etched on her face. There was something almost sacred about the moment, a sense that something beyond ordinary life was happening right there in the middle of the square. People were not just watching, they were experiencing, feeling the music in a way that reached into their hearts. Her hands moved faster now, flowing effortlessly from key to key. She had entered a space where music and emotion were inseparable. Each chord built upon the last, creating a complex, layered melody that was both beautiful and powerful. The crowd was completely entranced. Some held their breath during particularly intense passages. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. Children, adults, the elderly, everyone had been drawn in by her talent. For a brief moment, she faltered slightly, her fingers slipping on a key. But instead of panicking, she adapted instantly, letting the mistake become part of the melody. It didn't go unnoticed, though. It made the music feel even more alive, real, and human. People were captivated not just by her skill, but by the way she handled the unexpected, turning it into an expression of creativity and resilience. In that small imperfection, the audience saw a reflection of their own lives, messy, imperfect, but beautiful when approached with courage. Her music began to rise, gaining momentum, and with it came an undeniable power. She played with passion and intensity, each note vibrating with life. The crowd's energy surged along with hers. Some clapped softly, not wanting to interrupt the flow of the music, while others leaned in, captivated by every movement of her hands. It was no longer just a performance. It had become a shared experience, a moment of collective emotion that united strangers in awe. She noticed that a few people were whispering to each other, pointing toward her hands and the piano. Some were talking about how incredible it was that she could play so beautifully on an instrument that had seemed so flawed. Others were simply quiet, lost in their own thoughts, allowing the music to speak for them. It was as if the piano had become a portal to something greater, and everyone around her had stepped through, even if only for a few minutes. As the melody reached a particularly emotional peak, she allowed herself to feel everything fully, the nervousness she had felt at the beginning, the joy of overcoming fear, the exhilaration of connecting with a crowd, and the sheer thrill of playing music that moved people. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and her expression softened. She realized that the music had become bigger than herself. It was not just about showing talent anymore. It was about creating an experience, sharing a part of humanity with everyone present. The crowd responded instinctively. People whispered, gasped softly, and some even wiped away tears. One woman held her hands to her chest, eyes closed as though trying to hold on to every note. Another man smiled broadly, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the children were quiet now, completely absorbed in the performance. She could feel the atmosphere in the square vibrating with awe, respect, and genuine admiration. She continued to play, moving fluidly from one section to another, the music taking on a life of its own. Her improvisation became more daring, adding flourishes and complexities that surprised even herself. Each note seemed to resonate with the emotions of the crowd, feeding her energy back into the performance. The old piano, which had been expected to produce only hollow or funny sounds, now sang with depth and richness, revealing a beauty that no one had anticipated. At one point, she paused briefly, letting the music linger in the air. The silence was powerful, almost electric. Every person in the crowd seemed to feel it, the anticipation hanging thick around them. Then she began again, gently at first, and gradually building into a crescendo that filled the entire square. People were leaning in, eyes wide, hearts racing, caught completely by the transformation taking place in front of them. Her music told a story without words. It was a story of fear and courage, doubt and triumph, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And the crowd, sensing the depth of her emotions, responded with awe and respect. Even those who had come expecting to see a joke had been silenced by the raw honesty and talent of her performance. They realized they had underestimated her entirely, and in that moment, they became witnesses to something rare and unforgettable. By the time she reached the climax of the piece, the square was utterly silent. Not a word was spoken, not a single movement disturbed the spell. The audience was fully immersed, completely present in the moment. She felt a rush of gratitude and humility, knowing that she had been given the chance to touch so many lives with her music. It was no longer just a performance. It was a connection, a shared human experience that would stay with the crowd long after the last note had faded. Her fingers continued to move with precision and grace, weaving complex harmonies and delicate passages into a seamless flow. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the crowd along on its journey. People swayed slightly to the rhythm, closed their eyes to fully absorb the sound, or simply stood in awe, unable to look away. The energy in the square was electric, a testament to the power of genuine talent and heartfelt expression. As Part 4 drew toward its conclusion, she realized that she had reached a new level of confidence and self-assurance. The crowd's reaction had shown her that her music mattered, that her talent could touch lives, and that her passion could overcome fear and doubt. The once dismissed piano had become a conduit for something extraordinary, and she had proven not only to the audience but to herself that she was capable of greatness. The applause was still coming, soft at first, then gradually louder. People began to clap, cheer, and even whistle, expressing their admiration and appreciation. Strangers came closer, offering smiles, nods, and whispered words of praise. The atmosphere was one of pure joy and celebration, a stark contrast to the laughter and jokes that had greeted her when she first approached the piano. And in that moment, she understood something profound. It was not the piano, the space, or even the crowd that had created this magic. It was her courage, her talent, and her willingness to step into the unknown. By choosing to play despite fear and doubt, she had created a moment that would live in the memories of everyone who witnessed it. The music had become a bridge between hearts. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and resonant, as if the piano itself were taking a deep breath after the storm of music she had poured through it. For a moment, the square was completely silent. People stood frozen, caught in a mixture of awe, disbelief, and admiration. The laughter and chatter that had dominated the space just hours ago were gone, replaced by an atmosphere of reverence. It was as if the crowd understood they had witnessed something rare, something that could not be captured on camera or repeated at will. She sat for a moment, hands resting gently on the worn keys. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath, still riding the wave of emotion that came from performing for a crowd she had never expected to impress. She could feel the collective energy of the people around her, their silent admiration washing over her like a gentle tide. Even though she had been nervous at the start, that fear had completely transformed into something beautiful connection. Then, slowly, the first claps began. They were tentative at first, like whispers of acknowledgement. One person clapped, then another, and soon the sound grew louder, more confident, spreading through the square like wildfire. Strangers began cheering, some laughing in amazement, others whistling or shouting words of praise. The moment had shifted completely. The piano that had been meant as a joke had become the centerpiece of a performance that no one would forget. She felt a strange mix of humility and joy. The applause wasn't just for her skill. It was for the courage she had shown, for stepping into the unknown and trusting herself. People approached, smiling, eyes wide, offering words of encouragement. "That was incredible," one person said, shaking their head in disbelief. Another added, "I've never heard anything like it." Children ran up, asking questions about the piano and the music, their curiosity wide-eyed and genuine. For her, the reactions were almost overwhelming. She had never expected such a response. All her life, she had practiced in quiet rooms, performing only for herself, unsure if anyone would ever notice. And now, here she was, surrounded by strangers who were moved, inspired, and genuinely touched by what she had created. It was more than just a performance. It was validation, not from anyone she knew, but from people who had witnessed her courage and talent firsthand. People began to gather around, asking to take photos or simply stand closer to watch her hands for a few more moments. She laughed quietly, a little embarrassed but deeply happy, as she realized the full impact of what she had done. This wasn't a moment she had planned or expected. It had simply happened because she had dared to try, and because she had trusted her own abilities even when no one else had. An elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes bright with emotion. She reached out and said softly, "Thank you for sharing that with us. I've never felt music like this before." Those words struck her deeply. It wasn't about fame, recognition, or praise. It was about touching hearts, creating connection, and making people feel something real. That was the true power of music, and now she understood it fully. Others began to share similar feelings. A young man admitted that he had almost walked past the piano, thinking it was just for fun. "But I'm so glad I stopped," he said. "I've never been moved like this in my life." People exchanged stories, talking about how the music had reminded them of their own experiences, their own emotions, and their own memories. For a few minutes, the crowd wasn't just a collection of strangers, it was a community. Connected through the beauty she had shared, she looked down at the piano and smiled softly. It was battered, old, and seemingly insignificant, but today it had become the instrument of transformation. She had taken what others had dismissed as a joke and turned it into something meaningful, something that resonated far beyond its worn keys. The lesson was clear. Greatness could be found in the most unlikely places, and courage could turn even the simplest opportunity into something extraordinary. Her hands lingered on the keys a little longer, as if saying goodbye to the moment. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but many stayed nearby, still talking about what they had seen and heard. Some shared short clips on their phones, but the magic of the performance couldn't be captured fully. It was too much about timing, emotion, and presence. She realized that the true memory would live in their hearts, not in pixels or screens. A few people came forward to ask if she performed professionally or if she taught music. She shook her head, smiling shyly, and explained that she had only ever played for herself before. Their surprise was evident, but it only reinforced something she had known all along. Talent could be hidden, often in the most unexpected people, and it didn't need recognition to exist. It simply needed a chance to be seen and heard. As the square returned to its usual rhythm, she began to pack her things, her heart still full of excitement and wonder. The encounter had changed her in ways she couldn't yet fully articulate. She had discovered not only the impact her music could have, but also the strength within herself to step forward, take risks, and trust her own abilities. Fear had turned into confidence, doubt into validation, and a casual dare into a life-changing experience. Walking away from the piano, she felt lighter somehow. She had faced the unknown, embraced it, and come out the other side with a new sense of purpose. People continued to watch her leave, offering waves, smiles, and words of admiration. For them, it was a story they would remember and talk about for weeks. For her, it was the beginning of a journey where her talent and passion would no longer remain hidden in quiet rooms, but could shine in the light for the world to see. Later that day, as she sat quietly at home, she reflected on what had happened. She thought about the courage it had taken to sit at the piano in front of strangers, the nerve she had felt, and the music that had carried her through. She realized that the moment had been about more than just performance. It had been about belief. Belief in herself, in her talent, and in the idea that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when given the chance. She also understood that the world often underestimates those who appear ordinary. People had laughed, made jokes, and assumed she would fail. And yet, by trusting herself and embracing her passion, she had completely reversed their expectations. The experience was a reminder that potential could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment, and that sometimes the smallest opportunities could lead to the greatest transformations. Even after the crowd had dispersed, the feeling lingered. She could imagine the people she had touched carrying that memory with them, the beauty, the surprise, the emotion, and the connection. Music, she realized, was more than sound. It was a force that could reach hearts, inspire courage, and create moments that would never be forgotten. That morning, in a simple town square with a worn piano, she had witnessed the truth of that power firsthand. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the square, she returned one last time to the piano. It was empty now, quiet, waiting for its next story. She placed her hands on the keys gently, remembering the magic of the morning and the impact it had created. She smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning. One day she might perform again, perhaps for more people, perhaps on a bigger stage. But for now, she carried with her the memory of courage, connection, and the extraordinary moments she had shared with strangers who would never forget her music. That day, she realized something essential about life. Opportunities often appear disguised as ordinary moments. Fear and doubt may try to hold you back, but if you take that first step, if you trust yourself and your abilities, something remarkable can happen. The laughter, the jokes, the initial skepticism, all of it had transformed into admiration, respect, and heartfelt emotion. She had taken a single moment and turned it into a memory that would linger in the hearts of those who witnessed it. As she walked away from the square for the final time, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The courage to step forward, the willingness to share her talent, and the ability to connect with others had created a ripple effect that would last far longer than the music itself. She had shown that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things, that hidden talent could shine when given a chance, and that courage could transform even a simple dare into a life-changing experience. That night, she went to bed with her heart full of gratitude and wonder. The world had seemed a little brighter, a little more connected, because of the music she had shared. She had faced fear, embraced her passion, and created a moment that would be remembered not just for the notes she played, but for the courage she showed, the emotions she stirred, and the connection she built between strangers. In that moment, she realized that true greatness often comes quietly, in unexpected ways, and that every person has the power to leave a lasting mark when they dare to step forward. And though the piano remained silent now, the echoes of that performance would never fade, both in her heart and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the magic. It was a day she would never forget, a moment that would define her belief in herself, and a story that would live on as proof that courage, talent,